morning, everyone. So, as part of this current affairs session, we will be discussing what is happening in Sri Lanka. So, what's exactly happening in Sri Lanka? Sri Lanka. What is the current happenings? New president was elected. Who is he? Ranil Vikrama Singhe. When was he elected? Yesterday. So recently, couple of days back, Ranil Wickramasinghe was appointed as the president. Before that, what has happened? What was actually happening with the Sri Lankan as a country? What it is undergoing through? What is the issue of Sri Lanka? The whole issue of Sri Lanka. What's happening in Sri Lanka? What has led to the new president to get elected? Why was people coming onto the roads? Why were they protesting? What are the economic, societal, political, all those impacts because of whatever is happening? What is the basic premise of this whole issue? What's happening in Sri Lanka? Inflation? Inflation has increased. So, increase in inflation has led to the whole crisis. There are mainly three reasons. Okay, what are they? Taxes decreased. Tax policy. Twin deficit. Next. Organic farming. Organic farming is good or bad?
Good, but they have taken
overnight decision. So overnight decision has led to what?
They
Ban fertilizers and pesticides. Okay. So if you ban fertilizers and pesticides, production decreases. Okay. They might have thought in the reverse way. By banning fertilizers and pesticides, they might reduce their import bill. Whatever forex reserves they are paying for purchasing those fertilizers, that can be reduced. That's the government's stance. Okay. So there is no foresightedness how that organic farming decision can be impacting the whole economy. So these are the major reasons, you guess. Anything else? Only these reasons has led to the downfall of the whole Sri Lankan country. Loss of tourism. What? Debt trap diplomacy. What do you mean by debt trap diplomacy? Debt trap diplomacy. China has increased the interest rate. Okay. 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 Repay. So, what happens? China is forcing Sri Lanka to give back money now? Acquire some assets, whatever. So that is how the Sri Lanka has handed over a port, Hambantota. Hambantota port was handed over to China for 95 years lease because they are unable to repay their debt obligations. So the country is in the verge of default. So these are the basic, like whatever points you have said, this is the basic premise on which Sri Lanka is in crisis. So now, so whenever, like whatever issue is happening with respect to Sri Lanka, any crisis that has come up in any particular country, that may be because of some structural failures. Even if you take the example of Sri Lanka, the first thing which whatever decisions that the government is taking, all these comes under what? The government policies, yes or no? So the policies of the existing government has a role to play or not. So the first basic reason which the Sri Lanka is facing is because of ill-informed choices which were made by the government, existing government who are in place. Their policies were not are they affecting the country adversely, or it is supporting the country in terms of growth rate? It is affecting, it is deteriorating the growth rate of that particular country. There are derogatory. So the policies has to be made with a proper informed choices. That's the first thing. Once policies are involved, then obviously all these policies are made by whom? The government. The government means, who is the government? Who is the government? All the politics, whatever is happening from the historical times, that has an impact on the present day. This crisis, whichever is happening in Sri Lanka, is not happening overnight. It has its rules from the colonial times. Its historical underpinning. There is a lot of historical background which is running, and the corrupt politicians over the successive years, all this led to this present crisis. It is not only based on these particular things that has happened. These reasons can be said as prudent reasons. Instantaneous reasons might be this. But to trigger all this, there are eventually lot of decisions or lot of reasons which were acting in the background. So one is policies, your politics, whatever the state politics that the Sri Lanka is undergoing till the time of its independence. When does Sri Lanka get independence? In which year Sri Lanka got independence? 1948. From 1948 till 2009, Sri Lanka was fighting a civil war or not? It is fighting civil war with who? If you look at the map of Sri Lanka, like the northern portion of the Sri Lanka is dominated by Tamilians. Whereas the majority, the rest of the part is dominated by Sinhalese. These are the two major ethnic communities which were present in Sri Lanka. These Sinhalese are the majority, 70% of the population. 70% of the community in Sri Lanka belongs to Sinhale Buddhists. Whereas some 12% of the population are the minority community, belongs to the Tamils. So these are the two ethnic groups who were constantly in flux with each other. They are fighting for their ethnicity, for their rights. Till the time of independence, this has been happening. And this has been accentuated during the periods of 1970s, 80s, till 2009. An organization was set up by these Tamils known as LTTE. So they wanted to claim their own rights. They were not whatever the Sri Lankan policies, whatever the Sri Lankan government was existing in that place, it is majorly a Sinhale based authoritative government. Whoever came to power, all they belongs to this majority group of Sinhales. Like if you look at the timeline, the major timeline of right from the beginning, like if you look at the timeline from 2005 to 2015 almost, this period in which 2009, there is an end to LTTE. almost this period was ruled by Sinhale community, and the president at those times was Mahendra Rajapaksa. Mahendra Rajapaksa. The Sri Lankan government is almost run by only one family, that is the Rajapaksa family, the Rajapaksa brothers. There are 4 brothers. The major ones are Mahendra Rajapaksa and the recently the flown out president of Sri Lanka, who is a Gotabaya Rajapaksa. Both of them are brothers, own brothers. And there are 2 other brothers who hold different portfolios. One will be holding defense, some other will be holding. So all those 4 brothers will be governing the country till from 2005 itself. The whole Rajapaksa family is governing the Sri Lankan country. So during the time of Mahendra Rajapaksa, when he was the president, this civil war is put to an end. This civil war came to an end in 2009. From then, the growth trajectory of the Sri Lankan country has started. They wanted to achieve a growth rate because this is the time till from 1948, this has been continuing. This has been put to an end in 2009. From then on, the growth trajectory of that country has increased. And their GDP growth rate used to be around 8 to 9%, which is a sensible number. 8 to 9% GDP growth rate. Is it good or bad? It is good. So that used to be the overall growth trajectory of Sri Lanka. Then before this, in 2009, in 2008, what happened? In 2008, worldwide in terms of economy, 2008 is a very disastrous year for world economy. Why? 2008. Recession came. There is a global financial crisis, the subprime crisis. The global financial crisis came up. When any such global financial crisis or recession has come up in the world economy, what happens? Recession అనేది వచ్చింది అనుకోండి. What happens? Unemployment. Before going into unemployment, if recession has come up, what leads to unemployment? Before that, job loss. Job loss is unemployment. But why there is job loss? Why there is unemployment? Because of this financial crisis. Why? Demand and supply decreases. Why? How? How demand and supply decreases when there is a crisis? Prices of goods increases. Okay. If prices of goods increases, what happens? Purchasing power decreases. Okay, purchasing power is decreased. Then money supply will not effective in market. Why? Because whatever investments which were made by various multilateral institutions, the foreign investors, all that money will be fled away from that particular country. Same has happened with all the countries in the world. Whatever the countries, like be it India, Sri Lanka, Japan, whatever the developing countries are there, the money which was put or invested in these countries have been taken out by the investors. They went back to the developed nations, like a stable economy like US, because that is more stable. They can trust upon those countries because they are developed nations. At least the rate of return would be sensible there than relying on the developing nations. So that is the reason why a lot of forex reserves have been moved because of this 2008 global financial crisis from not only Sri Lanka but also from all the countries, including India. That has happened. At those times, when that is happening, when a lot of forex reserves has been going out of your country, forex reserves were going out of the country. But Sri Lanka has to fight a war because to wipe out LTTE from its territory, it is fighting a war. When it is fighting a war, obviously it needs to spend more on defense, national security, for procurement of weapons. For all these things, it required foreign weapons or not? Foreign exchange reserves or not? It required a lot. So, there is more spending on those defense and national security aspects by taking loans. This has further aggravated the problem. When the world economy is not performing well and you are taking loans from other institutional investors, or you're importing weapons from China and you're paying in terms of forex reserves. So obviously the forex reserves will be increased or decreased, the forex reserves of that particular country. It has decreased to a very substantial level. So this forex reserves decrease is present till the time of 2009 itself. It does not happen overnight. Not only now, whatever the problem, the economic crisis which is happening in Sri Lanka because of forex reserves, that is the main agenda. The main crux of this Sri Lankan economic crisis is depletion of its forex reserves. The forex reserves of its country is being depleted. Almost 70% of its forex reserves is wiped out in just 2 years. From 2020 to 2022, 70% of its forex reserves is depleted. So it is left out with only $2 billion. This figure is 1 month back. Now it might have been some $1.6 billion. The forex reserves of any country is depleted to $1.5 billion. And this Sri Lankan government has an obligation to repay debt every year for whatever loans it have taken during those times, by like from China or from Japan or from international institutions. Various international institutions have also provided loans to Sri Lanka in the form of what? Forex reserves. So IMF has granted some loans to Sri Lanka. Numerous times this has happened. First, it happened in 2009 when this Sri Lankan economy was independent. After the end of this, the civil war, they are completely deprived or depleted of its forex reserves. So it has to seek an external help from any particular country or some institutional investors. Then they have approached some countries like India, China, Japan. They help them to some extent. Even despite these countries helping them, they are still need for requirement of forex reserves. Then they approached the IMF, International Monetary Fund. International Monetary Fund came forward and they donated some $2.4 billion in the form of loan. So do you think IMF gives loans without any interest rate? Yes or no? So do they require any security when they give any country any particular loan? They have to keep some securities or not? Yes. So if they provided some securities also, whenever IMF is providing loan to any particular country, that loan comes up with some conditions or conditionalities. Conditions. What do you mean by conditions here? Conditions. Like opening up the economy is one condition which was put forth by them. So conditions means whatever money that the IMF is providing, in this case it is $2.4 billion. $2.4 billion loan was being granted or sanctioned by the IMF in 2009 to the Sri Lankan economy. This $2.4 billion has to be spent only in the way that I tell you to spend. It is not dependent or independent on your own choice. So in this scenario, whenever IMF is lending to any particular country, it is compromising on its economic sovereignty. The decision holding power of that particular government or that the central bank of that particular country is decided by IMF. They don't have any discretionary power to spend however they like. So the economic sovereignty of that particular country will be reduced. It has to act on the aid and advice, or it has to act on the conditions which were put forth by the IMF, International Monetary Fund. So only if you agree to those terms and conditions, then only IMF will be providing you loan. Because if you do not take loan from IMF, whether taking loan from IMF would be your first option or going out or reaching out to some other country for external help, that would be your option. What would be your option? First option. First option would be obviously pleading the countries to help them by providing them loans. If even despite many countries giving you loans, that is not sufficient, then the only way out is, because even if some country is donating you or granting you any loan, there is always possibility of defaultment when you are not in a position to repay. If I need to give you a loan, in return I expect repayment after particular maturity or time period. But if I think you are not in a position to repay me, then obviously you'll be defaulting me. I'll be losing out my money or not. So if that is in that scenarios, most of the countries cannot stretch beyond certain limit. So they provide loans only to some extent, which they feel that is some permissible, safe side that they can return me at some point of time. But when IMF is interfering, the same conditions applies to IMF or not? Same country cannot even repay back the amount to the IMF. IMF, the Sri Lankan economy can default IMF as well. In that scenario, IMF puts some what you call security in the form of collaterals. They have something as collaterals in which they take them as their repayment options. Same is the case with some conditions as well. Because it asked the whatever country is there, it asked them to spend this money in only particular way so that the economy can be revived. IMF is basically dominated by which nations? International Monetary Fund. It is basically dominated by which nations? So mostly developed nations like Western nations, the USA and almost the Western European countries. Western European countries. So obviously whenever IMF is putting forth any conditions, it has its own self-interest. These developed nations whose membership is mostly dominated by these developed nations, they have their own agendas. So whatever policy decisions that the conditions were put forth by the IMF, they obviously have a role to play. The Western interests have a role to play. Like as you said, opening up of the economy. What is the worthfulness or what is the usefulness for any country to open up Sri Lankan economy? To dump their goods and services. So opening up of economy, that particular country acts as a market for that country. Next, opening up of economy is one thing. Next, what could be the other conditions which the IMF has imposed? So it has, whenever IMF grants any loan to any particular country, it puts a limit. Like your fiscal deficit or the budget deficit should be 5% of your GDP by the year 2020. When in 2009, the IMF has granted $2.4 billion as loan to the Sri Lankan government. When they have given this, the target or the condition which was put forth by the IMF is the Sri Lankan economy's fiscal deficit should be 5%, should be within 5% by the year 2020. That's the target which was put forth by the IMF. So now, what is this fiscal deficit and in what way this is helping the IMF? Fiscal deficit target. What do you mean by fiscal deficit? Fiscal deficit. Total expenditure minus so whatever income that the country is earning, and whatever expenditure that the country is putting forth, it is spending. So your income and your expenditure gives you your fiscal deficit. On that, for that particular budget, whatever income that the country is getting and how much it is spending. So that should not increase more than 5%. So when I say it is 5%, is it putting a limit on the consumption or the expenditure side of the country or not? 5% of fiscal deficit. You cannot exceed 5% of your fiscal deficit. So whatever income is coming, on top of that, only 5% can be spent as expenditure. Even if it is exhausted or not, 5% is the limit. So if it has put a constraint of 5%, what does it imply for the Sri Lankan economy? What does it imply? 5% limit fiscal deficit మీద పెట్టింది. Then how does it impact the domestic economy of Sri Lanka? So what does budget document basically consists of? Budget lo emuntai? Whatever income you are earning, what are the expenditures you are, how rupee is coming and how rupee is going, how it is being spent. Basically that will be there in your budget. So income వచ్చే దానికి control, whatever income is coming, that is fine, that is clear. So expenditure మీద there is a cap or not? So why do government basically spend? In what aspects do government spend? Public welfare, infrastructure, for health, education. So for all those aspects, government spends. So for welfareistic policies, be it whatever policies that the government is exercising, for that the government spends. So the government spending. So there is a cap on government spending. So when there is a cap on government spending, all your welfareistic policies comes to a halt or not? You can do it in whatever possible way possible. You can make any promises. No, you cannot spend more on your welfareistic policies. The government spending is curtailed by the conditions put forth by the IMF. So the government, obviously the fiscal policy of the government comes into the hands of IMF. Whatever the IMF is directing you, only in such directions you have to spend. You do not have any discretionary power to spend lavishly on any promises that you have made on any infrastructure projects or any welfareistic policies or programs that you are implementing in your country. So there is a cap on your spending. This is the condition which was put forth by IMF when it took loan in the year 2009. So now, as we have seen the major reasons, the policies are clear and the politics. The politics, like we have seen, the Rajapaksa family is governing the whole Sri Lankan economy. From 2015 to 2009, Mahendra Rajapaksa was the president. At those times only, all these things happens. He directly asked the IMF for loan and the IMF has granted this and the conditions were put forth. So this has happened till 2009. So till 2015 also, the government was not in a position to spend on whatever decisions, the taxes, or it is not in a position, it is not in a liberty to spend however it liked. There are some conditions put forth by them. And then what happened after 2015 to 2019, there is a change in government in Sri Lanka. There is a change in government in Sri Lanka. Who got to power then? Who got to power during 2015 to 2019? A person called Mahipala Sirisena. Mahipala Sirisena. He is the one who got into power in 2015. So what does he did in 2015 when he came into power? We are still discussing about the politics of Sri Lanka. All the leaders, all the Sri Lankan leaders, whoever were in power from last 3 decades, everyone were charged with corruption charges. Every government is sacked down by corruption charges. Everyone is involved, irrespective of the Rajapaksa brothers. This Mahipala Sirisena, he is also accused of corruption and he was brought down from his power. So during his time, what happened? When the new government came into existence, then again, the same economic situation. The government, the country is not in a position to compete. It is not in a position to financially sustain itself. Every year there is a debt obligation of around 4 billion. Every year the Sri Lankan government has to repay their loans worth $4 billion. That is the debt obligation which was given by the successive government to the Sri Lankan. When he came into power also, every year $4 billion has to go in the form of loan repayment for various countries or various financial institutions, be it IMF or Asian Development Bank as well. That has to be gone. So now, when he came to power, the new government, so new expectations, people will be expecting more, that the change in government could lead to a progressive growth of the nation. But did that happen? No, because there is no incoming of money, whereas the expenditure is more. So again, he approached various countries. Various countries have helped him, almost like the China. Till now, it has provided $2.5 billion as loan to Sri Lanka. Till now, $2.5 billion it has provided them loan, and it has helped them. Even India. Is Sri Lanka strategically important for India more or Sri Lanka more? India. Because why? Why Sri Lanka is more important for India? Neighborhood first policy. Yes. Next. Strategically, Sri Lanka holds a strategically important place in Indo-Pacific region. Indo-Pacific region. If you look at the map from China to Europe, the whole Indo-Pacific region, Sri Lanka holds a very strategic, important place. So strategically, it is important. We share common historical, cultural, all common traits with Sri Lanka. Then Park Strait is strategic for trade. Okay. Next. So it can be used as an instrument by China to target India. So any adverse events or happenings, whichever is happening in our neighboring country, it has a derogatory implications or impacts on India. Because our neighbor, we need to protect our neighbor. So that only if India and Sri Lanka have good relationships, there will be no possibility of interference by any external countries to interfere in our own neighborhood. So the supporting hand has to be provided by India as well. So do you think India is providing supporting hand to the Sri Lankan government? Yes. How much did they provide till now? 3.8 billion dollars. So if as India has provided 3.8 billion dollars as loans to bring China out of this economic, social, political crisis, Sri Lanka is now, China is now targeting a bailout of another $2.5 billion to match the whatever amount. They wanted to match the contributions which were made by India. Because as we have seen, the Rajapaksa brothers are mostly inclined towards China compared to India. Because the only negative sentiment that Sri Lankans and Indians have counter arguments with respect to LTTE. Whatever the LTTE civil war has come to an end, India has supported whom? Sri Lanka. It has supported Sri Lanka only, but it wanted to give some rights to the Tamilians there, because the Tamilians are being deprived. So there is an important constitutional provision in the Sri Lankan constitution that is known as Amendment 13 of Sri Lankan constitution. That is it is a long back issue, 13th amendment of Sri Lankan constitution, where it provides for provincial councils. So each council, it has to be governed by their own provincial councils, like it happened during the colonial times. When we are in the British rule, provincial councils used to be there. Same is the case with Sri Lanka. There is a clause in the constitution of Sri Lanka which the successive governments, they are not accepting this. The provincial councils, like whatever the Tamil majority or minority people are there, they will be provided certain rights. They will be provided certain benefits in terms of education, health, representation. All those will be governed by their own representative. For that purpose, this Amendment 13 was introduced. But that has not been accepted by any of the governments in Sri Lanka. That is still remaining as an ideal, that Amendment 13. But these ethnic conflicts, whatever ethnic conflicts I am talking about, these were very much prevalent in Sri Lanka, even now also. The major ethnic groups are Sinhalese and the minority is Tamils, and there are other various religions like Muslims, certain portion, Christians, all they are also residing. But majority of the politicians, whoever like right from Rajapaksa brothers to Mahipala Sirisena and Ranil Wickremesinghe, all these belongs to the majority Sinhale community. So all the decisions, all the policy measures, all depends upon the majoritarian rule. Only the majority of the population is kept in mind, and policy has been formulated only to satisfy the majority population needs. That is happening till now. And now what they are doing, when majority populistic policies are in place, obviously it is a democratic government or an authoritative government. Authoritative government. So authoritative government has been in place even today in Sri Lanka. Authoritative government has been there, and they are mostly conservative politics have been happening. Conservative politics, and there is communal clashes between the conservative Sinhale groups and the some radical Tamil or radical Muslim groups. That has been continuously happening all across different governments. So now, in this time period, as I said, who came to the power as president? Mahipala Sirisena. When he came, he again approached the IMF. And then he took a loan of some $1.5 billion from IMF. Again, when IMF sanctioned some loan, it again came forward with some conditions or conditionalities. Now this time, what is the target which was put forth by the IMF? Earlier it was 5% by the year 2020. Now it was 3.5% of fiscal deficit. The target is 3.5% of fiscal deficit by the year 2050. That's the condition which was put forth by the IMF when the next president approached for a bailout from the International Monetary Fund. So after 2019, again there is a change in government. Then came to the power the present existing government, who were ousted from his presidential office. He is nothing but, who is he? Gotabaya Rajapaksa. He has been in power from 2019 to 2022. During his election campaign, he has promised to introduce tax cuts in the Sri Lankan economy. That is an electoral promise which was given by the existing Prime Minister Gotabaya Rajapaksa, that if I come to power, I am going to cut your direct tax as well as your indirect tax. So people will be motivated or not? When if he is cutting on your direct tax, whatever income tax that you are paying, it will be reduced. When it is reduced, what happens? The money which is available at your disposal, it will increase or not? Increase. When it is increasing, if the money supply is increasing in your own hands, what happens? Growth rate increase outada, decrease outada? Growth, competition in the market. So growth obviously has to increase or decrease. Growth rate and productivity, production in the economy should increase. When people are having more money, obviously even the corporates are also having more money, because there is a cut in taxation system. Both direct and indirect taxes were cut. So you are paying less to the government. When you are paying less, you are spending more. More money at your hands. So obviously people tend to spend more. When you are spending more, there is a growth in the economy. Your productivity increases. Obviously inflation, some level of inflation is obviously good for an economy. So that is the agenda of this president. His electoral promise was maintained. Like, he has announced a tax cut. But on contrary to this, what he has missed out is, if you are cutting on your taxation. If you are decreasing the taxation, direct taxes and indirect taxes, how will the government earn money? From which sources do government get money? What is the major source? Tax. So obviously there is a decline in the government income. Government is left out with no other options. The income of the government is reduced. When income is reduced, how can it spend? When income is reduced, there is no point in spending. It has to again approach some country or some financial institution to finance, to match up its expenditure. That has happened. So despite there is reduce in the taxation system, this has acted as an disastrous situation. He thought of propelling growth, but on contrary, it has affected adversely. So this is the first thing. On top of this, when there is no income is generating for that particular Sri Lankan country, obviously again what has to happen? You have to cut down on your, when income is very less for the government, you have to cut down on your expenditures. You have to reduce your expenditure. Income రాకపోతే expenditure తగ్గించుకోవాలి. On that basis only, overnight he has announced, because most of the Sri Lankan expenditure goes into importing some essential commodities in the form of fertilizers and all. Fertilizers and pesticides. So in order to cut short on this, as the income is not adequately generating for the Sri Lankan economy, he wanted to cut down on its expenditure. One such decision is to ban fertilizers on an overnight basis. That's the hidden agenda of that particular government. But you can claim, when you are banning fertilizers, you can claim that Sri Lanka is going to be the only country in the world which is 100% organic. That's the theme with which this Gotabaya Rajapaksa has announced. We are going to be the fully organic country in the world. So again, because of ban in fertilizers and adhering to the organic practices, can you able to match up the production levels of food grains in your country? Obviously not. So what happened? Obviously there is decline in the production of essential commodities like your food grains. When that has happened, if adequate amount of rice and wheat is not produced by adhering to this organic practices, again, to match up the essential commodities, to match up the demand of the people, you have to again import. So it went on to import rice from other countries. So your import bill increases or not? So your import bill increased. When the import bill increased, obviously it leads to depletion or deterioration of your forex reserves. So forex reserves again decreased. So these are the major policy interventions which were taken by the Gotabaya Rajapaksa government when he came to power in 2019. These are the two major policy decisions taken. He expected something and the real situation was something. Whatever he expected, it went on the other way. This led to the present deterioration of this forex reserves of Sri Lankan government. Now again coming back to our original discussion, we have seen how policies have affected Sri Lanka and how the politicians, whoever were in power, has affected Sri Lanka over the course of their governance. Now the next thing is, third thing is fate, which is not in someone's hand, which is not in our hand, but it ultimately happens, which is not in our control. One such happening is in 2019, when he was in power. What happened? There was an Easter bombings in 2019. More than 250 people were killed. That's an ISIS attack in Sri Lanka. So when your national security is at stake, obviously it will impact tourism. So there is an impact in tourism. Sri Lankan foreign exchange reserves, almost 12% of its foreign exchange reserves, 12% of GDP is being contributed by tourism sector only. 12% of the GDP means it's a huge number. So there is a decline in forex reserves of that particular country because of this Easter bombing event, which has an indirect impact on the tourism, because only if people feel that your country is safe, then only they visit your country. If they feel that your security surveillance levels are not up to the standard, when their lives are at stake, who will come to your country to visit whatever places, be it historical or recreational places? They don't turn up to your country. That is what happened in the wake of 2019. So like this is the case. Again, it led to decrease in foreign exchange reserves, forex reserves. So we are talking about FIT. Politics is done, policies is done. Now we are talking about FIT. On top of this, adding further to this wound, in 2019, what has came up? The Wuhan virus, the COVID-19 pandemic has struck the whole world. So because of this COVID-19 pandemic, again, there has been restrictions put forth across all the world economies. Some countries who are capable of affording can import certain essential goods like your food, fuel, medicines. Those can be afforded. But already this country is very short of its forex reserves. Already it is trembling with its foreign exchange reserves. How can this country be in a position to import such essential commodities? How can the people in that country be provided essential goods and services which are required for their survival? So this has further aggravated the situation. But even if it is aggregating also, whatever forex reserves are available with you, you have to spend them to buy those essential goods and services. So there is no point in compromising on that, because for your regular sustenance, you have to have your food, you have to have your fuel, all these are required. So there is no point in stopping or curtailing on those essential commodities. So the Sri Lankan government went ahead by importing all those essential commodities. So this forex reserves, whatever is available with that country, even further deteriorated. That happened with Wuhan virus, 2019. So now, recently, in 2022, what happened? 2022, what happened? In 2019 itself, whenever this whole situations, whatever the scenarios were happening with respect to Sri Lankan economy, then at those times only, Asian Development Bank, have you heard this word? ADB, Asian Development Bank. It came out with a report saying that the Sri Lankan economy is struggling with a twin deficit. The Sri Lankan economy is spiraling up with twin deficit problem. The report, which was published by ADB, Asian Development Bank, in 2019 itself. At that time only, it came up with a report stating that the Sri Lankan economy is facing an issue of twin deficit problem. So now what is this twin deficit? What is twin deficit? What is twin deficit? What is deficit? Expenditure is more than income. So twin deficit means two deficits. What are they? One is your fiscal deficit and the other one is your current account deficit. Fiscal deficit means whatever expenditure that you are putting is more compared to whatever income that the country is earning. This is more. Basically, it talks about your financial year, your budget year. In that particular financial year, your expenditure is more than your income. That leads to fiscal deficit situation. So Sri Lankan economy is reeling under this fiscal deficit from 2019 itself. Many of the reports have highlighted this. And the other deficit is current account deficit. What is this current account deficit? It is basically your trade deficit. Trade deficit means which is the difference between your imports and exports. Is Sri Lanka mostly dependent upon its imports or exports? Imports only. But there are some sectors which the Sri Lanka exports, which used to be there before 2019, it used to export. It used to dominate the world market in few sectors, few segments. Few such things are tea. Export of Sri Lankan tea is very prevalent in global markets. Another thing is rubber. Even rice. Before the introduction of this organic farming thing, rice also used to be imported from Sri Lanka. These are the various sectors. These used to earn forex reserves for the country. Forex reserves for the country. All these again got impacted by adhering to the organic farming techniques. And on top of this, export of tourism also used to contribute to the forex reserves of this country. Apart from tourism, there is also something called as remittances. What do you mean by remittances? What do you mean by remittances? People who are Sri Lankan citizens who are living in other countries, they work in other countries and they send back money to your home country. So the diaspora of Sri Lanka, whoever is living all across the world, they'll be sending money back into Sri Lankan country. That adds up to your forex reserves as well. The dollars, in terms of dollars, the transaction happens. So whatever the diaspora is sending back to your own country, that adds up to your forex reserves again. So these remittances also got hit by COVID-19 pandemic. Because of COVID-19, again, unemployment, poverty, all these came into existence. Because of that, no remittances. The inflow of remittances has reduced by 70% during the time of COVID-19 pandemic. That happened again. That adversely impacted its forex reserves. So these are the major. On top of this, you have something called as fisheries as well. Fisheries. This is also one of the prominent sector where Sri Lanka used to export. So these comes under your exports. When it comes to imports, now it is in a position to even procure or import its essential commodities, food, fuel, all the things needs to be imported. So the ADB has highlighted this twin deficit problem way back in 2019 itself. Despite they reported this twin balance sheet problem, the governments whoever came to the power, like in 2019, the Gotabaya Rajapaksa who came to the power, were not able to address these twin deficit problems. He is not in a position to control this twin deficit problem. So now everything went out of his hands. So recently, before this protests all came up, the forex reserves of that particular Sri Lankan economy was brought to some less than $2 billion. So it is no way in a position to afford even the basic essential services required for their people in that country. That is the situation in which people realize that we are in a deep economic crisis. Economic crisis led to political crisis. Whatever economic crisis is happening, the government is not in a position to help it out. So they started revolting against the government. They started questioning the government. They started protests. Once that has happened, whoever, the Gotabaya Rajapaksa, who is the present president, he resigned from his office. The cabinet completely resigned from its office. So the government is down. When the government is collapsed, who is the competent authority to look after the country? When the government is collapsed, the president has resigned, the prime minister has resigned. Then what is the course of action, political course of action for any country? Generally, what happens? In some countries, if few countries, military takes the power. In few countries, if you look at Iran or something like Syria, then the military comes into power. So here, when you are having a constitutional democracy in place, who is the competent authority, who has to take the responsibility? Opposition parties. So opposition parties, they come forward to form a government. Despite coming forward, if they are not in a position to form the government, then who will be the competent authority to look after the caretaker government? Someone has to hold that responsibility of taking up their country forward. Who acts in that place? As per the constitutions, whatever constitution prescribes, the Sri Lankan constitution. Court, Supreme Chief. In Sri Lanka, it is the speaker of the Sri Lankan assemblies. He has to take the proactive measure to act in whatever necessary situations. He is the competent authority to directly ask the opposition parties to come forward and form a government and form a consensus between both a ruling party and the opposition parties. So he has to take care. He act as a guardian in that caretaker government. So that used to happen. Now, recently, yesterday, as the president has asked the opposition to come forward, who got elected? Ranil Wickramasinghe, he got appointed as the president of this country. And who was appointed as prime minister? Dinesh Jayawardene got appointed as prime minister yesterday. He was the prime minister. When this Gotabaya Rajapaksa was president, who is the prime minister then? His brother, Mahendra Rajapaksa, was the president. So both of them stepped down. So the new government was formed. So now we have to see how the course of Sri Lanka would be there. So this is the whole scenario of Sri Lankan issue. So now few important key takeaways from this. What are the few important takeaways from this issue? Balance of payment crisis, is it the first major problem or not? So there is disruption of all the essential commodities in the Sri Lankan economy because of shortage of coal. Because of shortage of coal, there is no production happening in Sri Lankan country. No production. As there is shortage of coal, obviously your electricity disruptions happen. Almost 13 to 14 hours of power cut is being witnessed right now in Sri Lanka. And even there is shortage of paper. There is shortage of paper in Sri Lanka as well. It is not in a position to import paper as well. Only based on that reason, it has cancelled all the examinations across various schools, colleges. So all the education of its citizens came to a standstill because of this crisis. Shortage of paper led to cancellation of exams. No academics were going on. That is the state of disastrous situation in which Sri Lanka is currently reeling. All right. And added to this, another reason is recent increase in the commodity prices because of Russia-Ukraine crisis. That again comes under your fate. Because nothing in Sri Lanka stand. That has happened and it even adversely affected Sri Lankan economy because of raising commodity prices due to Russia-Ukraine crisis. Thus, that further aggravated their problem, or import bill. So, major reasons are historical imbalances which were existing in the economic structure. That's the first reason. Second is IMF loans and its related conditionalities. It has led to the current situation. Third is misguided policies by the authoritarian rulers over the course of 3 decades. This has led to it. And official announcement of some unscientific, irrational, illogical decisions and policies of the government also led to the present state of Sri Lankan crisis. These things should be in your answers. So, what are the various options which were available currently to the Sri Lankan? What are the options available to Sri Lanka right now in this situation? One thing is, again, look for bailout from the International Monetary Fund, because no one comes at your rescue beyond certain limit. Only international institutions come to your rescue. So again, look for some bailout from the IMF. That's the first option. Second option is for debt restructuring and loan deferment. Like if you approach any other country also, be it India, China, Japan, any country comes forward and grant you certain loan, you have to restructure your debt and make your deferred loan payments. Not at immediately, it is not in a position to repay. So deferring of loan repayments is again another structural changes that you can implement in this current situation. Take loan now and you defer the loan repayments after, be it 10 years, 20 years. After that period, once the economy is on right track, you'll be repaying the loan obligations. That can happen. And finally, any emergency assistance, if it is provided by any country, that can be accepted. Like India has rolled out $1 billion line of credit for supplying essential commodities to Sri Lanka. It is also transshipping some essential commodities like wheat, rice, sugar. All these things are supplied from India to Sri Lanka. So it is a wake-up call for all the countries across the globe to see that whether your social, economic and political policies which were in place are in alignment with the situations, circumstances which were prevailing. Are they aligned or are they ill-defined? Whether it is progressive or regressive, you have to analyze that and take course of actions. Whatever policies you are implementing, whatever reforms you are bringing in, how it is impacting your own country, that needs to be cautiously examined, and then only you have to take a call on this. It is a wake-up call for all the countries, not only Sri Lanka, because whoever successive governments comes into place, they are doing their own welfareistic, they are following their own principles of populism policies that adversely affecting in the long run. That has to be taken care of. And it also acts as a situation. It acts as a optimistic situation has arisen for India, a country like India, where Sri Lankan country as a whole is mostly aligned towards China. Now it is time for us to provide a helping hand in the form of assisting Sri Lanka in the tough times, so that our old neighborhood first policy, our bilateral relations can be even further accentuated or enhanced. So it is an opportunity for India. So these are the things which you need to look into with respect to the Sri Lankan economic crisis. All right. So we'll see you in the next class.